Nice to meet you. I wouldn't say I'm like fangirling here or anything,
Ooh.
but I am a bit of a fan, right?
I'm really glad you haven't castrated yourself in my name. That is like, I'm really grateful for that.
I'm just being honest. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Well,
You can fanboy all you want, but don't fangirl. Don't go the whole like don't go that
hold on,
path.
Pause. I'm not getting into the trans like thing just yet, right? I'm just saying like when I say isn't that usually the phrase like fangirling? Like isn't fanboying like isn't it like gender neutral there? I don't know, I hear fangirling all the time, but maybe maybe that's it.
It's always been gender specific in my neck of the woods, but you know, I have a very particularly gendered neck of the woods.
Don't worry, I'm not going to be getting any cat ear fucking headphones or anything here anytime
Oh, you're gonna do a little bit of
yeah, no, we're good.
Dancing around the Benjamin totem pole. Anyways, you're trying to compliment me, and I tried to head you off of the path.
Yeah, I mean that's just it is what. Regardless, I was saying I've been a bit of a fan. Like I think I followed some of the Evergreen stuff, and then I kind of like I think I watched a couple of your videos, pertaining to Christian theology, like back in the day, when I was because I mean you've been doing this content creation for quite a while.
6 years almost.
Yeah, and so and then I kind of fell off, and then someone was like, we were talking about James Lindsay, or they were like, oh, you have to watch this one with Benjamin Boyce and Local Distance, and I was like, oh my god, this is so good. So yeah, I'm really happy to be here, mostly, and I was kind of telling other people this, but mostly because when you're in this business, there's this weird triangle between entertainment, culture war, and philosophy, where you kind of never get to do all of one, and you have to balance them all. And it's like every time I'm on a larger platform, it's almost always debating communists on a debate platform, or it's like culture war kind of panel stuff. And I'm very excited to be somewhere where I can be a little bit more heady with other people, as opposed to just like my little space of the internet on Twitch, or well, actually tonight we're on Rumble, but yeah. Okay.
Twitch. How long you been doing Twitch?
Almost 2 years, but honestly, the censorship has gotten to the point where it's not really feasible.
But how did you start with Twitch? Like Sword Art Online, or
no, I didn't actually. Never played video games. There's old Twitch politics scene, right? Like Destiny started that, right? And then Vosh came out of that. Hassan came out of that, and then a whole bunch of people you probably don't know that are micro celebrities within the Twitch politics space. But its moderation and its audience is extremely left wing, and I was like, well, there's no libertarians here. There's barely any right wingers here. I can break through, kind of break through Hadrian's wall here, and it didn't work.
No.
I mean, I made relative success there in like the top 1%, but the real difference is the top 1% and the top 0.1%, right? And the censorship has gotten to a point where it's difficult to speak freely.
Are you able to map what is being censored, like what domains, like without touching on the topics, just the general domains or the pattern of it, like how they select what is?
It's kind of like the old days of YouTube, where how like everyone knew conservatives were being censored, but nobody could prove it, and so you could look at like tangential metrics, right? So it'd be like I would average live somewhere between like 30 to 45 viewers, right? And then I would see someone else averaging 10 viewers live, doing the exact same content as me, debating on the same panel as me. And then I would see that their VOD would have like double or triple my views. And it's because the algorithm is constantly pushing them
shadow
to
banning.
get seen. Right. And then my algorithm is like, I would get like one new viewer despite being close to partner level in views. It's like, it's a bunch of little things like that. It's not me complaining about Twitch censorship isn't that I can't back up with hard evidence isn't really what I'm going to talk about.
Well, I'm just wondering if you understand what is being promoted, like what content or what.
So here's my best guess.
Yeah.
My best guess, God's honest truth, is that a major function of the Twitch algorithm is looking at a ratio between viewers to subscribers. So viewers to how much money you're pulling. and it aggressively pushes content with low viewers with a high ratio of funds so that they'll get new people and new people will send. And I think that's why you constantly see slatterns, whores, if you will, e-girls and things like that constantly pushed.
Okay.
Because I don't think that they're actually support hot tub girls so much as that's what makes money. And I think it gets pushed more in the algorithm because it makes more money.
So, there's this great, I admire this man so much. He's Dave Green, or The Distributist. He's a YouTuber. He's been doing this thing for a long time. And he has pointed out that the way that these really big BreadTube or these really big left-wing streamers are able to spout communism and make bank on it is because communism, or at least their brand of communism, appeals to people with disposable income, people who don't have families. And so who would have that? People who don't want to have jobs but have money. So they'd pay the communists to feel good about themselves and their worldview, because they're mostly anti-work rather than pro-communism, which is communism in effect doesn't work unless everybody works their ass off. Same with capitalism, but capitalism,
you have to work to eat, right?
Yeah, and then e-girls too, like just basically mental and gonadal masturbation is what's going to pull in the most money from disposable income people.
My co-host has a joke that he always says that is, there's nothing more capitalist than a communist streamer, right? Because they're constantly begging for money, constantly trying to sell merchandise, as opposed to focusing on the topic. It's kind of, but that is part of it. Yeah, I would say that right-wingers and libertarians in the streaming space get less money because their audience is more individualistic, more responsible with their discretionary spending, and their audience kind of expects to buy something. And so there's a challenge in content creation from the right-wing libertarian space, which is how do I gatekeep some level of content from you in such a capacity that you feel obligated to pay me, but also I'm not destroying my brand or my loyalty or looking like I'm selling out or anything like that. And then I'm pushing the message, but also I got to eat. And then at a certain point you break a threshold where it doesn't even matter and the ad revenue is enough anyways.
How do you sell libertarianism? How does one peddle libertarianism in this marketplace of ideas?
I would say, and that's that triangle I'm talking about, right? And that is that I would say that I don't sell libertarianism so much as I am selling, via ad revenue and donation model and things like that, and occasional bit of merchandise and things like that. I'm selling theory and information and entertainment, right? Hopefully kind of combining the two, and hoping that you'll watch me. I'm a terrible salesman. I'm good at a lot of things, but I'm not very good at it. It's actually one of my friends, that I've met on this space. He's like, you have to stop being humble when you ask for money, and you have to start telling people that you're selling war bonds for the fight for free speech and liberty. And I'm like, yes, I need to sell war bonds, right?
Yeah, right on.
But it's
culture war bonds.
Yeah. So I mean, that's what I'm doing. All right, I'll take his advice. I'm selling war bonds for the fight of liberty and in the culture war and stuff like that. Yeah.
So just to reiterate your triangle, it's entertainment, philosophy, and information. Theory and information. Is that the third leg? Information.
Yeah. I mean, I get. I mean, it's kind of just it's not like a well thought out theory. Yeah, it's kind of a little bit of a heuristic, but it's I recognize that if I want to talk about argumentation ethics, or I want to talk about estoppel principle, with analogies of A does this, B does that, I'm gonna lose some people. Right. And so I need to have some fart jokes in there, and I need to meme on Joe Biden. And then there's also the culture war thing that I think ties these two things together. And so talking about trans issues, detrans, we've done a lot of the same stuff. I think we've interviewed a lot of the same people.
So entertainment, philosophy, and topicality, or
yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. And how did you get your start in this? I have to say this out loud because I have to bust your balls about this. You guys call yourselves the Argumentation Ethics Affirming ANCAP.
Well, nobody actually says that per se.
But people keep on telling me to talk about Argumentation Ethics Affirming ANCAP. So what is that?
So argumentation.
At least the gay people have an acronym. I know it's not an acronym.
Okay,
it's like
so
a namealism or something like that. But.
My greatest strength as an anarcho-capitalist or a libertarian, I would say the two are actually interchangeable.
Okay.
My greatest strength is that I'm one of the few people in my community that's not autistic, right? But right, which autism can be weaponized autism, as Dave Smith says, can be a powerful force, right? But
for finding flags in the desert if Shia LaBeouf pisses you off or whatever.
Yeah, you got it exactly right. But also there is a difficulty in communicating, complex, heady, ideas that most people get to via Austrian economic theory, right? Like,
yes,
I think that's how most libertarian, and so like, I wouldn't call myself an argumentation affirming, AE affirming ANCAP, right? I would just call myself an ANCAP, and I believe in argumentation ethics as proposed by Hans Hermann Hoppe.
Okay, so what is argumentation ethics?
So
that's a methodology of discourse? I have not in this form.
So argumentation ethics is a pretty controversial thing, right? Basically, libertarianism, as set out by Murray Rothbard, and in that vein, and I'm not talking about de Jacques libertarian socialists, right? The American kind of rebirth of libertarianism and anarcho-individualism, set out the non-aggression principle, right? Except the non-aggression principle is kind of an axiom, right? It's an axiom that if you follow this, these other things follow. But as we know, in philosophy, there are axioms, but if they're not grounded well, right, they're very easily subverted, right? I think we see this happening in the culture where we see this with our current government. We see this with Christianity, right? In some of the non-denominational churches that have become Aspen Institute, social emotional learning, gender queer churches, right? If your axioms aren't strong and grounded, there's a weakness there. And Hans Hermann Hoppe, I would say, others would say came up with, I would say discovered, because I believe it to be objectively true, discovered the philosophical grounding of the non-aggression principle. And if you go through this step by step, and you go through the logic and you accept the logic, it basically proves that it is morally unjustifiable to say that a state should exist, or that that one ought use aggression or violence against others, or that one ought pay or take taxes, etc. Which makes it pretty controversial, right? Because the claim is a huge claim. I think Christopher Hitchens famously said, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence when debating Christians, right? It's an extraordinary claim, because if one accepts the logic of AE, then one must denounce statism or the support of nation states.
Okay, so just to figure out why it's called argumentation ethics.
Mm-hmm.
Where's the argumentation? What's the ethic? Or is it the logical formula to get to this, or to extrapolate this principle of non-aggression?
So argumentation, as defined by Hans Hermann Hoppe, is one of two means of resolving conflict, right? So when you have a conflict between two people, there are two separate things that you can do. You can resolve the conflict via argumentation, or you can solve the conflict via violence, right?
Okay.
So, right. So argumentation is where you make moral propositional statements, right? You can't make a moral propositional statement like to a person while beating them to death, right? I mean, you can, right? But we'd have to go through the full logic of AE, but you're not actually arguing at that point. You're just engaged in violence. You're not recognizing someone. You're not trying to do, what I should say is, it's not, what is the term? It's not intersubjective justification, right? You're not justifying it to an observer. You're not creating a justification for your beliefs if you're using violence, right? The observer and the other person are not accepting your belief or your argument because it is true or because they believe it to be true. They're accepting it because you're forcing them to accept it via violence. And so it's not a justifiable thing.
Yeah.
So the argumentation is that portion. And then through that process, he believes that arguing for violence, and I believe it is objectively true, that by arguing for violence, you're engaged in a performative contradiction, and therefore it is nonsense what you're saying. It's illogical nonsense.
It might be illogical nonsense, but it's reality. That aside, I've been
Mhm.
researching marriage counseling. I'm interested in couples therapy because I've been dealing with gender so much that ultimately I want to harmonize or understand the harmony of the sexes. And in a marriage, I guess you do have basically two forms of exerting your will. You have violence and you have discourse. You
Mhm.
talk your issues through, or somebody forces the rule of law on the household. Now, within discourse, within argumentation, there are still forms of violence, belittling, contemptuousness, criticism. There's a variety of different forms of emotional abuse
Mhm.
or persuasion, gaslighting, manipulation that take place within argumentation. So argumentation itself is not exempt from violence or enforcing your will on another person. It might
It's
be a little bit more complex, but it's still there. So argumentation in and of itself is not free from power struggles.
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, I also think it's really interesting that you bring up fighting within marriages, because like one of the most foundational studies within marriage counseling was I can't remember the exact title, but it was fighting versus arguing. And actually the
Yeah.
distinction between fighting and arguing is made as one of the landmark cases. And within psychology and marriage and family therapy is the idea that couples that argue, right, that are genuinely interested in the other person and genuinely attempting to ascertain truth and not coerce the other person, have
Yeah.
successful marriages. And those that use coercive elements and those that might engage in some form of abuse and things like that, they butt heads and they don't actually reach truth. And so I would say that what you're bringing up actually affirms my position that when the
Okay.
coercive element is there, the search for truth is missing and it's not a genuine form of argumentation.
Okay. So the problem with an open society is that
Mm-hmm.
it's not necessarily a marriage. I guess a marriage is more or less contractually, people voluntarily, more or less voluntarily enter into this agreement and then proceed to live their lives together. As a society, at some point, people have to enforce goodwill or good argument, right? That's why the law is there. That ideally, where you go and you perform a rational argument in front of a judge that then decides between these two parties and then enforces
Mm-hmm.
good faith argument, right? So how do you institute good faith argument without the threat of divorce or violence in a society?
I think the threat of force or violence here is interesting, because there's a common misunderstanding about libertarianism is that
Yeah.
it preaches like some form of pacifism or something,
Okay.
and that's
Yeah.
in no way, shape, or form what it is, right? And this is where a separate thing. So now we're getting away from AE, which is a lot more complex and there's a lot more process to it, but that's fine. And we're getting
Okay.
into kind of Kinsella's estoppel, right? So if I go up to you, right? Estoppel is a legal principle in common law. The estoppel principle basically, and this isn't libertarianism, this is just in general, right? If I'm convicted, let's say 2 years ago, of drinking and driving, I am estopped when I get a second DUI from going to court and saying, I've never drank and drive my entire life, right? Because the court says, well, actually, we have documentation proving that you were convicted of drinking and driving previously. You're stopped from saying that. Like that's not a claim you can make. I can immediately say that is a false claim, right?
Okay.
So the same thing is true with aggression, right? So if I break into your home, right? And kind of John Locke had that, that famous example in his second treatise on government, right? Where he says, a thief breaks into your home and he's put himself in a state of war, right? Like it's not your responsibility to determine whether or not he's armed or whether or not he's dangerous. He broke into your home out of regular hours through a back window with a mask. Like he's in a state of war. Fuck him, right? His life is forfeit, right? Well, libertarianism says the same thing, right? Is that when you aggress upon me, you're actually incapable of arguing for your own rights in the same way as someone that is a non-criminal from a natural law perspective is, until you pay restitution and repayment, right? So you can't logically, if the entire basis of the non-aggression principle is founded upon this argumentation that one ought not violate my bodily autonomy, but my own actions violate other people's bodily autonomy, I'm stopped from being able to argue those rights until I denounce those actions and I pay restitution and repayment towards those people so far as they see fit. or some other voluntary system of governance that you set up, like a covenant council or an insurance agency or some court system that the community agreed to use as an arbiter in these matters.
Okay, okay. So that concept of bodily autonomy can be hacked. I just feel like there's a lot of hacks to this. Let's say emissions, right? Some sort of emissions, some company, or I like to use charcoal to cook my beef in the evening. Really smoky flavor, delicious. It takes 6 hours to do. A lot of greenhouse gases. Am I not, like, my bodily autonomy, which needs meat? I'm totally convinced that I need meat, and good meat at that, to continue to have bodily autonomy. If that exercising that is infringing on the bodily autonomy of my neighbor, who thinks that all that smoke is carcinogenic, like, I can see, like, you could always, like, hack the bodily autonomy to take away freedom from people and give it to other in the name of safety, in the name of bodily autonomy, right? Have you seen that shored up? I just want to know the grounding for that.
Right. So, I mean, there's kind of three situations, three different lenses you could look at this from a libertarian lens, right? Like, you could look at it as you're looking at it, which is like a pure theory perspective, right? And the pure theory perspective is if any of your actions directly, not indirectly, not second or third order consequences, but first order consequences, right, pollute or damage someone else's property, right, then they can brand you as someone who has damaged their property and demand some form of restitution equal to the payment or some resolution in this matter, which is, I don't know, they demand that you put a hooded vent over your thing so that disperses, or, like, whatever that may be, however that comes together, right? So that's the theoretical. And you're right. It sounds ridiculous when you put it up that way, because we have this legal system that we've built to deal with kind of like all of these gray areas and placed We've placed arbitrary lines that have necessitated some form of order, right? Like, because we need order, so we place an arbitrary line, right? So then we look at it from the practical perspective. And the practical perspective is, if this is a constant issue, then you have contracts based off of the places that you live. When you move into a neighborhood, when you take away the nation state, you take away all the county and zoning laws, right? What do you replace that with, right? And so you might replace that with a covenant community. You might replace that with like a council of elders. You might replace it with a small local government that looks very similar to what we have today, that is democratic, et cetera, so long as it is voluntary and the individuals that purchase property in your community agree to those stipulations as part of the contract that they agree to. It's all voluntary, et cetera. But it also could just look like an HOA. I know people hate HOAs, right? But it's like, the idea really boils down to, is it right to make a law banning pit bulls? And the answer is that there's no right answer, right? Because
pit bulls or pit bulls?
Pit bulls.
Okay, good.
The dog, right? So, like, is it wrong to ban pit bulls? And the answer is, there's good arguments on both sides as to why someone wouldn't want to or does want to live in a community with pit bulls. And the right answer is not a top-down authoritarian measure. The right answer is, you go to a neighborhood and you go to a dog park that meets your preferences, right? You live in a neighborhood and you sign a contract that says, in this neighborhood, these are banned dogs, right? This dog park, these are banned breeds, right? And you go live in a fucking neighborhood where there are no pit bulls and you're happy. And someone else that is in love with pit bulls can go live in a neighborhood where that's allowed, right? And that's kind of the distinction there. It's the voluntary element.
Okay. There was a third one. So you went theoretical argument or viewpoint, practical, and then...
So this is like a level of abstraction above practical. And it's like, I would call it like practical. And what I would say in this instance is that just because there is objective truth in who is and isn't the criminal doesn't mean that human beings' capacity to ascertain what that objective truth is perfect, right? And so it may be technically true that you're abusing your neighbor by putting your charcoal grill next to them and like smoking out their porch. But like, there's a line of delineation, right? Where like this becomes less ridiculous, right? So let's say my grill is right next to their house and it's right next to their porch and I can't even go on my back porch without getting smoked out. And then there's my grill is all the way over there and some Karen thinks they're being poisoned because like she can kind of smell burgers cooking, right? And so the thing is that there is a line where it becomes aggressive and there is a likely amount of restitution or repayment But like, what we do as a society is we attempt to find the truth, and we do so in the most cost-effective means possible, right? And so the individual that's constantly taking people to court and has like an insurance for this likely gets high insurance because she's a fucking Karen and can't stop messing with people, right? So like, I call it the practical because we as humans, we're never, just because there is an objective truth that I can argue for logically, doesn't mean that we in the community will always find that truth, right?
Okay.
A murderer murdered someone. We do the best we can to find the murderer, but you never know.
Sometimes you do. Well, not in the case of OJ. We still don't know. Jury's still out on that, right?
Jury's not out, right? OJ's son was the one that killed that woman. All right. OJ took credit for it. That's why the DNA evidence matches OJ. That's why his son was in a mental institution and wrote letters that said, "This is the year of the knife where I solve problems with my knife." That's why OJ got a lawyer for his son first before him. And that's why he went on that slow car chase that was a spectacle, because his son was leaving the state with a vehicle that ended up in a storage facility.
I had no idea we're going to get into OJ trutherism. I was just, my brain was just firing off. So thank you very much for that.
I had to.
Excellent.
That's my opinion.
Excellent
I don't
answer.
fucking know, right? I don't know, but I'm pretty sure that's what happened.
Dropping bombs. We'll see if YouTube's going to take me off YouTube for that. But okay, we're jumping around. We're not doing a doctoral dissertation. This is totally conversive. We're just popcorn, just like shooting off. One thing that I see as a problem stacked against libertarianism is convenience. Central authority, centralization to a greater or lesser degree always gives us security or convenience in exchange for freedom. Yeah, right. So with the example of all these different communities with all these different laws, it's so complex to, if you imagine America having like 500 different communities with 500 different laws, you'd have to learn them all. And then you get there, you can't learn it. Yeah. Instead of 50, you don't even know when you get there that you can't even learn all the laws because it's just stacked and stacked and stacked and stacked and stacked. You have all these different common laws, more like, I guess you would think of Europe in the case, but eventually liberalism or common law, there's these different systems that end up favoring centralization of power, clean up an environment. Another example, France used to have all these different cultures, all these different little languages and stuff. After the French Revolution, rationalism comes in and enforces one language for the entire country. It creates a superpower at that time. So there's convenience of communication and then a lot of power to go out and get more resources. So libertarianism, it seems like to slip into more and more individual, more and more complex, nuanced interactions between people. And the trade-off would be the loss of convenience and then the loss of security, or loss of the surety, maybe, because there's always constant.
What I would say is it's not convenient if it's not a choice. I have no problem with these things occurring via choice, right? So like, I have no problem with a marketplace that where convenience is going to be held within a free market as well, right? If people truly desire that convenience, well then some company will come along, right, and say, we have this area, we'll call it, FloridaMeccaCorpo.com. I don't give a fuck what you call it, right? Pardon my French. I tend to curse a lot. It's the streamer in me. I apologize. I'll try and I'll try and church it up for you a little bit, right? Whatever, right? So this company is hold on, I'm going to cut my music.
You have music
this company
playing?
Exists. Yeah.
Okay. Like, is it like dubstep or something, or like
kind of
relaxing elevator?
It's virtual. Sometimes it's a little both. A virtual audio cable. I have like 4 of them. I cut it off. It's fine. So
Cool.
Convenience is something. So how do I put this? I would start. Let me back up. Human action, right? So one of the principal axioms of libertarian philosophy is the idea of praxeology and human action, which is that humans are rational actors, even when we work with imperfect information, right? It is always true that we act out our subjective and moral preferences, right? We sometimes do so with imperfect information. So like our goals and our actions don't necessarily align. And that's kind of like cognitive behavioral therapy, kind of 101, right? Is getting those two to be closer together, right? When we do dumb things, it's usually because we're not rationally seeing things, but nevertheless, we act out our subjective preferences. And so if there is a marketplace of places to move, and convenience really is so valuable to people in their voluntary choices because they want safety and security, and they don't mind paying, let's say, 10% of their income, and they don't mind paying for some sense of security and peace, right? Then those polycentric communities will do better. In terms of your travel analogy, right? How does one travel through a polycentric community as we did in the past, let's say in Austria, when there was like 70 different little polycentric nations with like different cultures and things? Well, first, I would say, number one, that's based. That's true multiculturalism, where people can self-segregate and come up with different ideas and then try them out in a market, as opposed to this forced kind of progressive idea where multiculturalism just means we eat different food, but really we all have to have the same ideas. But even still, I would say that what would likely happen is you've created a market void. You've described a market void, which is people are confused because they want to travel to new places, but they don't understand the rules and things like that. And so I'm a company, I'm an insurance company, like a rights enforcement agency. It's my job to take care of your rights. And it's my job to represent you as a company, just like Geico does, right? During some infraction. And I negotiate with other companies and we've settled these disputes financially before things even have to go to court and you pay your insurance. But if neither a company or party can agree, we'll go to arbitration. Just like in car insurance accidents, 97% of them are handled by Geico and Nationwide, et cetera, right? But then occasionally they get elevated to litigation and they go to court. The only difference is instead of the state running it, it's an arbitrating firm that both companies have agreed to be as a third-party arbitrator in the future. And so I do that, and then I give you a little phone app, right? And the phone app says, like, tracks your GPS because you wanted the convenience. It says, hey, you're heading into this town. 10 things you should not fucking do in this town, right? This town doesn't let you do this. Make sure you know not to do that, right? And if you install that app on your phone, you get a cheaper insurance rate from your insurance company that protects your rights because they know that you're less of a problem and then they're less likely going to have to handle these situations in court because you're going to behave appropriately, or at the very least, you're going to have the appropriate information to behave, right?
Okay.
I don't really know the answer, right? Because I don't have a crystal ball. I'm not a consequentialist either. But that's just one way that convenience that sounds so bad. It's like, well, if it really is that important, people will want it, right? And people will find ways to voluntarily obtain it, as opposed to this idea that we should arbitrarily impose presumed convenience onto people and then say from this kind of, social contract theory, we can kind of like post hoc justify it and say, well, people love the convenience of our oppression that you're not allowed to get out of. It's like, fuck you, let me choose it.
So another reason why communism becomes popular or is favored by, let's say, these companies, and I don't know if America's going communist, but it's adopting more and more communist tactics, like departments of information or truth and reconciliation and all these things.
I would say it's going Marcusian. I would
say
it's more. Yeah, I would say it's more Marcusian than, let's say, communist per se. I mean, it's a natural trajectory of the dialectic, right? Moving into Marxist materialist dialectics, and then postmodernism, and then like the rebranching of critical theory. I would say it's moving into like what I like to call, to the normies at the very least, I just call it like rainbow neoliberalism. You know what I mean? It's like it's a sick kind of Nazi-esque mixture of socialism, communism, a perfect idealized state with like LGBT issues all wrapped into one terrible package.
Wonderful. Okay, so whatever that is, whatever you just described as Marcusian, Marxist, I don't know. There's so many ideas and thinkers going on in it, but you see it emerging because it favors power. It favors centralized power. Power is just adopting all these different things to maintain and extend its power. How does again, this is back to how do you sell libertarianism? How do you put the seed of libertarianism in a government such as the United States government, let's say? How do you make it advantageous to it to allow different communities to do different things, to loosen up its universalizing grip, and allow difference to happen, and then maybe reap the rewards, maybe incentivize it somehow?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably one of the toughest questions you could ever ask a libertarian, right? And they'll give you cop-out answers, but I appreciate the hard question, right? Because when you look at the long march through the institutions, the kind of like,
Yeah.
Lenin's, dual power theory 2.0, right? Because, dual power theory was the idea of like creating, and the Gramsci's kind of like, counter, cultural hegemony. Like all of these tactics that the left have been doing since they started to see the failure of communist revolutions that have been gripping us really since, since before, I don't know where it really starts, right? I mean,
Yeah.
everyone kind of points to the Frankfurt School, right? But I mean, the thought leaders
Frankfurt
that
School
inspired,
just adapted it to a cultural mix rather than economic or class-based, I guess. They went from class to identity somehow.
yeah, but I think the strategy changed there too, right? By
Yeah.
adopting the countercultural hegemony, I think they recognize, much like the Fabian Society, which is where I get my channel's name from, Fabian Liberty, because it's the opposite of the Fabian Society, which is I have a belief that more freedom over time will eventually convince more people. But how do you, when you know that the state's incentive is more power, and the corporations that engage in regulatory capture, to borrow from Yarvin, right? Like the cathedral as a whole, right? They're incentivized towards the gaining of power. And so how do you incentivize a state-based apparatus to give up power, right? It's an impossible demand. And I think I think you're right. It's a huge problem for libertarianism because, the fascist sees this and goes, yeah, well, we'll stamp out all the people that don't believe in our values once the right gets pissed off enough and we have a large enough reaction, and we'll put an end to this. And the left says we'll slowly subvert and slowly poison and slowly gain power and capture. One of these two will win is kind of the seems to be modern history's kind of pattern. What I would say is that there is a third solution. And the third solution is a long one, and I don't know that it's a guaranteed victory, right? So I won't BS you, right? And be like, no, it's all fine. I think the fascists and the communists do have a more viable strategy. But what I think, which is the right one, the only one that I think is morally true, is a combination of pulling away. A combination of centralizing like-minded individuals that have following a philosophy of liberty, and pulling away. Because while the right kind of reaction, I know I'm borrowing Marxist terms here when I say reactionary, but it's the best term to describe it, right? Even though they're talking about people that, never mind. We'll use it colloquially, right? I'm not using it the Marxian way.
Okay.
While the right reaction can use violence to stamp out the left in its institutions, what I see is a slow march in history towards less and less violence and more pulling the levers of control, right? I think we're moving away from putting troops in the street and like firing everybody towards using algorithms, using behavioral nudging, using marketing and advertising to slowly self-censor and censor people into having the right ideas and pulling the economic levers so that, it's harder and harder for people to financially fight back and things of that nature. Getting people banned from banks or PayPal. I think we're moving into a kind of a new unknown territory, kind of here be dragons at the end of the map. And what I think the right answer for libertarianism is to just move to New Hampshire, be a part of the Free State Project, find people that agree with you. And I think we need to focus on the philosophy, because I'll remind people that there is another part of human history where everything changed because a few philosophers brought arguments that were so damn convincing it changed the world. And we call this the Enlightenment, right? I mean, there is and we've fallen from the Enlightenment. I would say that Enlightenment philosophers were using a form of utilitarianism and consequentialism and convergence to discover objective truth. And those systems of consequentialism and utilitarianism have been poisoned, and they're now used to subvert Christianity, subvert truth. I'm not a Christian, for the record, but I have a lot of, that's different. But they're use it to pull away towards what values and subjective preferences leftism has always had, right? And then mixed with a dialectic. And so they've been poisoned in such a degree that we're getting further and further away from the truth. And so
Mm.
what I would say is I think we need a philosophical awakening, and I think we need to prepare for the fact that times might get worse. I'm a bit
Well,
black-pilled
no,
here.
yeah, I don't think they're gonna get better. So build a chicken coop right now. Is my philosophy. Talk about a white pill, just a little egg every morning. You got your own egg. Um, the problem with
Yeah,
philosophy
right.
is that it doesn't make any sense unless you're a philosopher. You
Mm,
mentioned earlier there's a lot of autists in libertarian. Every libertarian that I've known has been smarter than me, and very smart. On top of that, not that I'm all that smart, but they're always very smart people. They process information in a way that most people don't.
mhm.
The problem is that religion fills the gap because it tells stories that translate values or encapsulate values that can make sense to the philosopher and make sense to the normie or the pleb. So,
Right.
so you talk about the Enlightenment, you evoke these Scottish people making all these arguments, right? And you say that we've fallen from the Enlightenment. Maybe we never had the Enlightenment. Maybe they just kind of were grasping the whole time, and whatever they grasped in that grasping allowed for a great amount of advancement in some way, but then also led to progressivism in another
No,
way.
I agree.
Um,
I agree. I think they were incomplete, but I think they were using a system of consequentialism that allowed them to discover natural
okay,
law deontological positions. Right? They weren't using Christianity that says "Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal." Right? They were
okay,
using kind of like this ethics of utilitarianism to go like, well, this seems to be a rule that is basically universal, right? And they were discovering certain things like freedom of speech, right? Like, as much as I dislike utilitarianism, J.S. Mill, like when he writes on liberty, he comes up with all of these different arguments that basically becomes this unassailable consequentialist argument for the need for freedom of speech. But I would say that the philosophy that they were using was always on shaky ground because it was easily subverted over time by what we have today.
okay. So let's concentrate on what do you mean by consequentialism?
I would mean that any form of the normative ethics, so anything that particularism, utilitarianism, I would put them all in the broad category of consequentialism, which is that an individual takes their, and this is probably I'm struggling to give a charitable definition of it. where
Tell me
where
a story,
where
like just a playground story. ELI5.
right. So the idea being like it's wrong to steal, right? And the Christian would say it's wrong to steal because God commanded us not to steal, right? God that gave us logic, the breath of life. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God, right?
Yes,
Gave us
yes.
logos, right? It's wrong to steal, right? Well, the consequentialist would say, well, it's wrong to steal because you wouldn't want to live in a society. What if you maximize this and everybody stole all the time and nobody stole? If we said that it was okay to steal, then saying that would lead to a horrible breakdown of society and we would have a terrible world to live in. The problem is that the consequentialists will then simultaneously contradict themselves and say, well, it's okay to tax. And taxes are okay because it's not really stealing because, well, we have some cockamamie reason why it's not stealing, even though people are involuntarily having their resources taken from them. But it's okay because we all benefit. There's a calculus, right? Who will build the roads, the police, the fire departments, the system of governance? The safety and security is assured by our taxation. So it's okay to do something that you might consider wrong because the calculations at the end show that we live in a
Yes.
better world because of this thing.
Okay. It seems like human nature is always going to engineer some sort of God, some sort of just authority. Thou shalt not steal versus it's really important not to be homophobic. And so we're going to have a day for not being homophobic. We're going to have a day to recognize, like all the gay days. I'm just, sorry to bring up the gender thing. There's so many gay days. The United States government is just
Yeah.
like so many gay days. Like there's all these gay days.
Isn't
Um,
isn't
and
yesterday
it's
or
God.
today like the apologizing for homophobia day or some stupid stuff?
Yeah,
Like
and biphobia. Don't
it's
forget
insane.
biphobia too. It's just like bi-directional phobia. If you can't turn left, right, and you're just scared of like that choice, you want like a third way all the time. Anyways, um, so you bring up consequentialism. So they reason through, they instead of doing a myth like thou shalt not steal, God says, period.
Mm-hmm.
They have a thought experiment that leads you down this road of seeing how things operate, and then they have to smuggle in authority. Ultimately, it seems like human nature on a societal level tends towards creating some sort of God, some sort of all-consuming or all-directional purpose for everybody to submit to. Another hard sell for libertarian is you do you, but a bunch of people
No,
doing them,
no,
are you going to
no.
eventually conglomerate into an us? We do us, and you must do us too. It just seems like
This is why I'm
human
so
nature.
glad I'm
Tower
here.
Babel.
This
Okay.
this is why I'm so glad I'm here, because just you say I've spoken to these libertarians. They seem like really smart people, and I'm sure many of them are, right. The Here is a problem. There's a problem within libertarianism that is true with any ideology or philosophy, right. If you were to go to a random Christian and ask them to explain like certain theological principles of like, what did God mean when he told Israel that, that they don't want a king, right? And you were to ask all the Christians what that was about, what do you think? Maybe 1% might get a like a real interpretation that's meaningful, right? And
Mm.
99% are probably either not even going to know that part of Judges, right? Right? Or they're going to just get the answer wrong. And this is true of libertarianism too, because libertarianism is a distinct philosophy in that the non-aggression principle, as backed up by argumentation ethics, is a system of legal philosophy, natural law, that is descriptive. It tells us these are the things we can rationally, via logic, prove are morally unjustified. But all of the things that go into the other category, libertarianism itself does not make moral prescriptions about. That is up to whatever society you believe in, be it Christian, be it Muslim, be it secularist, be it the whatever, right? And so what will happen is that you will see baby libertarians, right? Libertarians that don't really understand the philosophy will say, well, this is okay, therefore sex work is okay. Like Reason TV, like celebrating sex workers. It's like, no, that's not libertarianism. Libertarianism just says I'm not allowed to call the police and kick down your door because you're a sex worker. It says nothing about my opinions on whether or not the slattern is a good person, right? And so when you say,
Mm.
well, the society will invent this, it's like, well, yeah, the closest thing we have to anarcho-capitalism in the United States today are the Amish and the Mennonites, right? Like those are ANCAP societies, and they're deeply, deeply Christian societies. And so when we talk about moral prescriptions, we're out of the domain of this. Is in part the weakness of libertarianism, because communism gives you a moral prescription and it gives you an enemy to hate, and statism gives you a sense of safety and security, whereas libertarianism tries to sell you mystery and confusion. And it's just
Yeah.
because it's
Yeah.
complicated, but that doesn't
Okay.
mean it's
Yeah.
wrong.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
so yeah. So I mean, when you say, well, just you do you, what it actually means is I'm not going to call the cops and arrest you and put you in a gulag for doing you. But it doesn't mean that I won't build a community of Christians that tell you you're not allowed in my community because you're disgusting and you're gross and we don't want your kind around here.
Yeah. Okay. Could you get it? I think this is be a good entry point for what ANCAP is for the normie audience. And
Mm.
I love my audience because they're as normie as I am in so many different ways, and I'm a total normie here. So, how are the Amish ANCAP? Like, what does that mean? They ride in buggies, they wear dresses, they build barns in a day. They have like 1 year per life of
Hmm.
complete just absolute madness with cocaine and hookers, whatever you want to do for Rumspringa or whatever.
Hmm.
And then they go back to normal mostly. And they have among the highest birth rates in the world, if not America. So
Yep.
what is it about their community? If we kind of strip away the very strict cultural norms that they have, if you strip those away, how economically or politically they are ANCAP or anarcho-capitalist.
So two things. I'll answer your question. I just want to say one thing. When you say Amish, right? Um, what you're really you have a caricature of Amish people in Pennsylvania, right? That are eschew technology and stuff. There are the Beachy Amish, which are communities that are kind of somewhere in between Mennonites and Amish, right? The Mennonites are more progressive than the Beachy Amish, and there are other
Progressive meaning what? Sorry.
more like religiously progressive, like more liberal, like you know what I mean? Like the Beachy Amish will have they use cell phones and drive cars and work jobs,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
But at the same time, not everybody that's Beachy Amish has a cell phone, and it's very very common amongst the Beachy Amish that the cell phone's very restricted by choice, and that the wives and the husbands utilize each other's cell phones, and that friend groups use their cell phones as a means of being their brother's keeper to ensure um, that they're not like
Abusing it.
going down a
Yeah.
sinful path. Yeah.
Yes.
So so what ANCAP really is, right? At its most base point, right? What anarcho-capitalism is a political philosophy of law that states that one ought follow the non-aggression principle. And so what this means is that you should not aggress upon anybody else, right? You should not be the initiator of violence or force against other people. Now, once you pull that apart, that means you can't stop capitalism by force, right? Like you can't, the communist that says, it means private property rights because they're connected to an individual's bodily autonomy, and they have rights to private property. I could explain that more, but I want to be, like you said, keep it simple, stupid.
Okay.
Right. So a religious community that has a self-imposed voluntary set of rules that doesn't arbitrarily impose or aggress upon other people is one-to-one commiserate with anarcho-capitalism. Now, I have disagreements with them, right? To me, I'm a little bit more progressive in my social values. To me, I don't like their pacifist stance, right? Because I think it's not necessarily a path to success long term. But that doesn't mean that they're not ANCAP and that they don't follow anarcho-capitalism. What doesn't follow anarcho-capitalism is forced taxation, forms of slavery, any forms of aggression or fraud against other people. And the Amish don't do that, or to the best of their ability, don't do that. And they have, council of elders. And the thing is that another important element of Amish society is that you can leave, right? Like once you come of age, and in many of them, they actually force them to leave, to go out and experience the rest of the world, to make sure that this is really the life and the choice that you want to make to be a part of the community. And I think that's why it's so commiserate with anarcho-capitalism.
Yeah.
But when you think ANCAP, you think like libertarian mecca, big corporations, money bags, and that's not really what it is.
Yeah. Huh. The a problem for me, just narratively, or just I guess in a certain form of philosophically, is this notion of choice. Like one didn't choose to be born. One didn't choose to be a man or a woman. One doesn't choose when they die. But if you go up to Canada, you could probably, kill your baby and
soon.
Yeah, right. Yourself. So that just seems so one-sided. Like I want freedom, but I know that every freedom that I'm afforded is built on previous obligations of my forefathers, and of my civilization, dating back thousands of years. The people who sacrificed themselves for me.
That's why I don't like the pacifism portion of the Amish, right? Like I think you do need to fight to protect these systems.
Yeah, well, and just to bring up that, like the Amish, yeah, they get a year off to go out, but it's kind of tricky because they weren't given the option in their rearing. They weren't given multiple options in their rearing of all these different things. So they're just kind of thrown out into the wild. And of course, they're going to mostly come back because they were not acculturated to these other forms of living. So it's not really voluntary. Like if you're born Amish, I don't know what the recidivism rate or the fleeing rate is, but it's got to be like 1 or 2, 5% or something like that, right? So voluntariness is a very subjective thing.
So when we say voluntary, we mean coerced, right? Like non-coercion. You're not lied to. There's no fraud being committed in the action, and there's no threats of being compelled by some measure or another. right?
But there's
Now,
always, do you have any kids?
yes, I have 2 children. Yes.
Okay, like 2-year-olds. You
Mhm.
have to compel them to wash their freaking
Absolutely.
hands to go to bed. Yeah, okay. So human
Absolutely.
being
So
is not born a rational voluntary agent. This is what I'm
no,
trying to
no, no, no.
figure out.
What I would say is, so Walter Block has a wonderful essay on this, and he's a sweet grandpa, and he'll talk to anybody. He'd love to talk, and he has some wild things that he believes that I disagree with, like voluntary slavery. He wrote a bunch of books called "Defending the Indefensible," right? But
Huh.
setting that aside, right? Like I disagree with him, but that's another day. But what I would say is this: is that a child is an emergent adult, right? A child is not capable of consenting, right? We recognize that they will grow up into an adult that has the capacity for choice. And so what it is as a guardian, it is your responsibility to protect to the best of your ability um, the latent adult properties, if you will, like the idea that this person has human rights and they ought not be violated, right? And to violate them would be a form of aggression, right? But that doesn't mean that because the kid wants to wear a fucking purple raincoat to school on a day where it's not raining, that you go, well, they made that choice, so we let them, right? What it means is, look, I am the parent, I'm a rational actor, I'm an adult here, I have like a fully formed frontal cortex, right? Like I'm going to compel you, absolutely, because what you're really doing is kind of think of it like a will, right? Right? When
A
someone dies,
bequest. Yeah.
yeah, when someone dies, their will kind of it lets them know what their wishes were after they're dead, right? Now imagine if a will needed to be translated over time. Let's say a period of 18 years, right? Well, as you translated more and more of the will, you'd start to see the individual you have here. And think of them like that, right? You kind of start to understand what it is that they want, but you can't fully release any of the property from a will until the whole thing is translated,
Mm,
just in
yeah.
case you did something wrong, right? So what you
Yeah.
do is, as they become more and more of an individual, you as a parent, you begin to give them more freedom, more individual choices, and you kind of back off, right? But
Yeah.
ultimately, you don't relinquish that control until the very end, until they've really
Yeah.
proven themselves to be worthy of going out and striking out on their own as an adult.
Yeah. And that is very culturally specific. Different cultures acculturate their children to greater or lesser degrees of
Yeah,
independence and freedom. Yeah, you think of the tiger mom, Asian stereotype. I know a lot of Asians. Some of them are my friends, so this isn't being racist at all. But there's a particular type of Asian woman
yeah,
immigrates to America and instills in her daughter or son, you have to study, you have to study, you have to study, and really, really rides them because and doesn't give them so much choice. So much as maximalizing a narrow range of choices. You can be a music director, a doctor, or a lawyer. There's certain cultures, maybe you could bring up the Jews if you wanted to, that
hmm
really ride their children to produce, to be really productive members of society, to have a really big sense of obligation to a very narrow set, to basically their family and maybe their religion or their clan a little bit,
hmm
but it's really restricted. And then others like basically waspy people that just let their kids run roughshod because they want to give their kid the maximum amount of freedom to explore themselves and maximize themselves. And maybe
free
those
range
kids, some of
parenting.
them become very, very brilliant. Most of them kind of become very, very marginalized. It's just a different kind of calculus. So it's not the human being can be programmed for more or less voluntary freedom, right?
Yeah.
So in a libertarian, I guess just for you, because you're saying libertarianism is you're not going to judge anybody else, but to what degree do you want your
Oh, do
kid
I
to be
judge?
successful or to be free? Because I think freedom
Yeah.
isn't just slavery, it's also success. You have to submit your freedoms, your immediate desires, let's say, for long-term outcomes. So there's a lot of tension there. So I'm just wondering how you implement libertarianism in your children.
So I would say that, the relevant literature, that because we're in the domain of things I can't prove to be unjustified, right? Important distinction for libertarianism, right? Often when
Things
most
I
people
can't prove to be unjust. See, you guys, you have such a branding issue. Like
I know, I know.
you have to
I'm
explain.
explaining. I'm explaining, right?
Okay.
When most ideologies or philosophies or people say you should do this, there is a hidden threat of coercion or force behind that, right? When the communist says this shouldn't exist, they're often also saying, and I will use the violence of the state to stop it, right?
Yeah.
When the Christian conservative says, we don't want, children playing violent video games, it's very quickly followed up by a law for like an ESRB rating system or something, right? There's going to be an element of coercion in that, right? So, and I agree to that in things that are inherently aggressive, right? If I can prove that you're aggressing, you're initiating force or violence against somebody or their property, which is in effect violence against them, right? Because you can't separate their property from their past and their present. They have a historical link. You make them a slave in the past when you steal their property because they worked for the things that they achieved. And then in the present, you're stealing those things that they worked to achieve. So what I would say is, but there's another domain, which is like, I can't prove it's aggression, right? So I cannot unequivocally prove that I ought use force or that I'm allowed to use the police state, if you will, or whatever force available to me to stop you. But that doesn't stop me from making moral prescriptions about what I think should and shouldn't be done, right? This is where we go into the domain of trying to argue with people and trying to segregate into communities that follow the values that I have, and then trying to convince other people. What I don't get to do is take over Japan because I think tiger moms are bad, right? What I say is, well, that's how the Japanese do things. I think the Japanese are doing it wrong. Here's how I'm doing it, right? So from the relevant literature in psychology, I would say that generally when we talk about child rearing, we're talking about 4 types of parenting. Is how most of the research breaks it up. There's authoritarian, authoritative, neglectful, and then there is, oh my God, I can't, the free range parenting kind. I can't think of the name, the relevant term in the literature for it right now. But these are the 4, right? And what we find is that the free range parenting allows for kids that are mentally the healthiest. They tend to be mentally the healthiest. They tend to have flexible, the least amount of issues in terms of their mental health. But they also tend to be the least self-reliant and financially struggle and have issues and then end up with stress and financial concerns. On the other end of the scale, you have authoritarian, the tiger moms, right? Those kids tend to develop a lot of stress, have a lot of mental health issues, but they also are the most successful financially and the most self-reliant. And then authoritative is kind of like the in-between, and it tends to do, again, this is kind of like doing a calculus. What do you value more, right? Like, what is your value? Like, what's more important? But they tend to do kind of the best of the both worlds. And then neglectful kids of neglectful parents or abusive parents kind of just are screwed every which way, right? I tend to think as a libertarian, the way that I parent, right, is that I tend to be authoritative, or at least I try to be. But I also try and instill at a very young age a sense of boundaries and independence in the children, while also recognizing that I'm the father figure. For example, my daughter is mostly potty trained. She wears diapers when she goes to bed. She wears diapers when we go out in public in places where I can't trust that there's easy access to a public restroom. And my son is autistic, so even then, that's like really difficult to do, like public restrooms with a daughter, with a son. And like, there's never a changing station in the men's bathroom anyways. Right. So what I tend to do with my daughter is, like, if I have to change her diaper and she's freaking out, like, I talk with her about it, right? Like, just a little bit. I'm like, okay, daddy has to do this. I don't force her. Like, I try and let her know, like, I understand that, like, this is your space and everything, but we got to clean it up. And I do the best I can to like get her to that, try and be calm. Sometimes I'll make a game out of it. Right. Yeah. You know what I mean? And we'll play around a little bit. But what I don't want to do is I don't want to be like, be quiet, like we're doing this. Right. Because I want her to have that sense of, I want to build at a young age, a sense of independence, a sense of individuality. But at the same time, I'm not going to give my daughter a urinary tract infection because she doesn't want her diaper changed. Right. Like, no, I'm changing your damn diaper.
Yeah. So if you were given San Francisco, you didn't have to take it by force. It was a gift, somehow, completely voluntary. You have a bunch of tech billionaires and then druggies in the streets, right? And everybody gets to do what they want. on some level that seems kind of libertarian in a way, because there's a bunch of very, very rich people and a bunch of very, very just people just shooting all the drugs that they want, right? Like this is a messed
I
up
disagree
version
with that.
of libertarianism. So I'm wondering
Yeah.
how you would reform a place like San Francisco with the disparities that it would have to make it a place where you would want to live, right? Where
Okay.
how do you enforce a moral order on the highest and lowest elements of society to bring them in tune?
Okay. So I don't know that there's a right way to answer this question because it's such a fantastical kind of idea,
Well,
right?
thank you for
Like,
humoring me. Yeah.
I think the right answer to that is like Wyclef Jean's "If I Was President," right? Which is, if I was president, I'd be elected on Friday, I'd be assassinated on Saturday, I'd be buried on Sunday, right? Like I'm pretty sure whatever scenario creates this is going to have me killed very soon. Um, the powers that be are not going to allow that. But I would say yes. The term you're looking for is libertine, right? Which is these ideas that aren't really grounded in libertarian philosophy at all.
What
But
are they
this idea of,
grounded in then?
well, they're grounded in many people that flock to libertarianism have a certain personality domain, right? Which is we like to call them like guns, God, and ganja. You know what I mean? Like I want people to just be able to do whatever, live and let live. And Hoppe argues in Democracy, the God That Failed, that one cannot be a libertarian without being conservative, and one cannot be a traditional conservative without being libertarian. I'm sure many conservatives would take issue with that, but it's a very silly kind of notion that you have of not you personally. I understand you said it was like kind of a how is this
Thought
not the
experiment,
utopia? Yeah, but so I just want to point that out that that's not really what libertarianism is. So
Okay.
I'm the private property owner of all of this city of this giant city of California, right? And the first thing
Just
I
San
do is
Francisco. Let's not do California. Just San Francisco. Just San
San
Francisco.
Francisco. Okay, so San Francisco. The first thing I do is I completely like I slowly begin the process, right, of abolishing all systems of governance. How does this not turn into an anarchy hellhole? Mad
Would you
Max
start with the
road.
police or with the school board? Let's just
So
for sake of
so
argument.
so if I don't want people dead, right? I'll give a macro scale so you can understand the process, because I think this is an example I use that works well, right? So if I don't want people dead, what I first have to do is I first have to give people the freedom to create solutions, and then I have to slowly get rid of the oppressive things that are pricing out of the market the actual solutions until eventually I can dissolve them. A lot of ANCAPs are going to be mad at me for this because they would say
Okay.
your duty is to get rid of everything. So I'll give you an example. The Food and Drug Administration. The Food and Drug Administration is a horrible, horrendous, terrible thing that has that is the blood of so many people on its hands, right? During the AIDS epidemic, right? They stopped medications for HIV. They stopped vitamins and things like that from coming in, forcibly poisoning people with AZT and horrible doses and cancer because the science said it was okay, right?
Fauci was there though, wasn't he? Like making sure that everything was okay in that.
Fauci Fauci deserves a lifelong prison sentence for many different crimes.
Oh, okay.
Right?
He's a repeat offender.
He's a repeat offender, right? But also we could look at Purdue Pharma as an example, right? And the way that they captured FDA, they got them to get a special warning label. They were able to sell to doctors a fraudulent product, OxyContin, as non-addictive, and told all the doctors across the country, especially in the region of Appalachia, in the Appalachian regions in Pennsylvania and Virginia, that this was a miracle drug that would get rid of pain, right? And then, of course, we have the opioid epidemic, right? And, of course, we could also look at the fact that 25% of all drugs that are FDA approved are recalled later for issues. It's a horrible, horrible, horrible scheme. And it's the cathedral, right? The large corporation in the state, Purdue, all these companies pay hundreds of millions of funding to the FDA, and then the FDA trusts their studies and rarely does investigations.
Not to mention all the executives that are just circulating among all these.
So hopefully your audience is correctly incensed at only hearing 10% of the crimes or 1% of the crimes of the FDA, right? So what happens if we just get rid of the FDA tomorrow? Well, what happens is who fucking knows, right? And many ANCAPs will say that is the right answer. what I would say, and that's why my name is Fabian Liberty, because I believe in the Fabian strategy, is a slow reversal of things. Fabianism coming from Fabius, the first general to defeat Hannibal. When Hannibal invaded, he burned all the farmlands and did hit and run tactics because he knew Hannibal couldn't get his supply lines through the Alps fast enough, and he was forced to retreat. The Fabian Society, basically, their strategy was slowly we'll have more progressive welfare systems, and then eventually the UK and the world will become communist. We believe the opposite. People will like free market things if we actually free the market, and it will be more effective, because it's impossible for the state to do better than the free market. It's because the free market doesn't suffer the economic calculation problem. For the readers and listeners, Hayek, you need to read your Hayek.
Hayek.
Yeah, but so what I would do, right, is the first thing I would do is I would make it legal for people to take drugs, period, right? Let's not go full-blown anti-war on drugs, right? Like one step at a time. I'm not going to make heroin legal like immediately, like though eventually it will be, right? What I'm going to do is just like, listen, if a drug is approved in the UK or Canada or in Australia, there's no fucking reason we can't take it. I think one of the great examples, this was during the Biden administration, baby formula. We weren't allowed to legally buy baby formula from Europe during our shortage. Instead, what did the government do? They sent Connexes to Switzerland to buy Nestle baby formula to then bring that in with your tax dollars, when we could have just bought formula from like the UK, which has better standards on baby formula and less soy and sugar than our own baby formula. It was stupid, right? And so I would say, like, we'll get rid of that, all right? Well, anybody can take anything, and doctors can prescribe any drug that they want to their patients, right? If a doctor says, take this tea, they can do it, right? Well, all of a sudden, patients are going to be like, well, I don't know if I can trust my doctor. I don't know if I can trust this. And all of a sudden, there starts to become companies that'll come forward that'll be like, we'll tell doctors what new drugs are good drugs and bad drugs, right? And it'll end up getting tied to their medical insurance, et cetera. And then as companies begin to fill this role, and there's competition in the market where insurance companies and doctors and patients are all utilizing different sources that are competing, that are trying to afford accurate information at the lowest price available, right, to doctors and patients. Eventually, we just phase out the FDA. And that convenience aspect that you're saying we need will just be there. It'll go away like a whisper. No one will care that the FDA is gone, because insurance companies and companies that and doctors and whatever will already be utilizing a private FDA model, if you will, that is more effective and costs less money. And while your drug prices might go up, your taxes will go down, right? And as your taxes go down, they'll go down at a higher rate than your drug prices will go up, because it's a government organization. It's by definition, it won't be as effective as the market.
Okay. So you think that
the same thing in this with policing and every other
thing in San Francisco?
Yeah.
So you can't
strengthen the rights of private security, right? I would allow private security to kill people that are in their fucking stores, stealing things, or, et cetera, et cetera. Like, if you go and do a smash and grab in a Target, I'm going to say, look, we're going to defund the police, but also Target, you're allowed to hire security guards, and we're not going to prosecute you if you kill someone that's doing a smash and grab in your store. Yeah. Guess what? Yeah. We don't need progressive DAs and all this other shit if people do a smash and grab in a Target and all of a sudden they get popped.
You would still have some sort of judge looking through the footage to see that the security isn't just randomly like going on murder sprees.
Yeah, I mean, like, again, you have to do a slow process in order for this to work effectively without it. But like, people are so hooked on this drug of statism, right, that you can't just go cold turkey overnight. Like, ideologically, they believe at this point that they need all of these institutions, and and hilariously enough, they believe that these institutions like the FBI are protecting them, right? Instead of just causing terrorist attacks all the time, which is what they do, right? They hilariously enough believe that the FBI is on their side, right? So you need a slow process of dismantling these things. You can't just destroy all these institutions and then be like, oh, it'll work hunky dory. I mean, pragmatically, anyways.
Oh, okay. So if these let's just do a thought experiment. The
Mhm.
United States government becomes so bloated and inept that it
Sorry.
undermines its own authority,
Hmm.
and then starts to corrode and collapse from the inside, which might be happening right now. Let's just
Yeah.
say this huge lumbering beast, the cathedral, just kind of starts to collapse on a variety of different levels. Is it possible that in that decay, that some sort of libertarianism or conservative mentality plus a libertarian ethos? And
Hmm.
I want to get into that, like that it has to be married. I think they have to be married. I don't think you can have libertarianism without some sort of honor culture, without upright individuals to
Hmm.
behave in their own best interests,
Hmm.
to think smartly, and then to educate other people, their children, to think smartly and stuff like that. But do you see some libertarian hero coming in and saving the collapsing world government that is currently run by the United States, whoever is running the United States right
So I'm not particularly good at writing teen dystopian novels, right? Like I don't know, you know what I mean? Like
now?
I mean it's nice to fantasize about for sure.
Yeah.
You know, I think when things collapse, I think more often than not, history shows us that people beg for powerful figures to come in and fix things by any means necessary. I
Yeah.
think that tends to actually be
The
the
Caesar
the
effect,
yeah,
whatever.
yeah, yeah. I think that's more likely, and that is why I think it's really important that libertarians. I don't want to say give up, right? Because there's a simple, James Lindsay, a lot of other people, they get really mad when libertarians say this and talk about national divorce and things like that, right? I'm not saying apply for national divorce tomorrow. What I am saying is why are you in New York, right? When New York announces, that they're going to start like reducing, they're going to start carbon taxing red meat to get rid, like, why are you living there? Why? Move. They don't want you. They will not be kind to you and they will put you against the wall if this trajectory continues. So why are
Hmm.
you living next to these people? Right. And so I think once people get it, right? That you need to move to a community of like-minded individuals, right? That creates a resistance effect, right? Because, you know, it's easy to bomb a country or a city into oblivion, but not if you want to take it over, right? Because, and this is why, like, total war is great when your back is against a wall, but it doesn't work when you want the resources, including human capital from an area, right? And so the idea, if enough people are together, right, you, enough like-minded libertarian, paleo libertarian, conservative, limited government people are living in an area, right, it becomes very difficult for an authoritarian regime to just march in and by decree, because you can't just bomb the whole thing. I mean, you can, right? But then the United Nations is going to come after the country. Like you're going to make enemies everywhere. You're going to lose kind of your soft power and your political capital, and it's going to
Hmm.
be expensive, and you're going to gain nothing from it other than like getting rid of a presumed enemy. Um, and so this is why you need the Second Amendment. This is why you need gun rights. Even though you need to arm yourself, you need to be in an area because you know you can look at, let's say, World War II, when the Germans took over France and the French resistance in World War II. They were able to slow down the Germans by multiple days and basically stymied the Blitzkrieg because they put dinner plates on the road, and the Germans couldn't tell whether or not those were landmines. Right, like when trying to occupy a country of determined citizens that want their freedom is incredibly expensive. So it's not really about fighting them in this all out war. It's about a deterrence and about separating and about recognizing that, yeah, the state power and some of these institutions may continue to grow in power and ridiculousness, but you need a pushback against that. And I don't know what that future looks like. Does it look like secession? Does it look okay? Does it look like things, just kind of normalized? Does it look like all out war? Like, I don't know. I'm not engaged in a
Hmm.
crystal ball thinking, but
Yeah, yeah.
I, I can look at New Hampshire and I can look at the fact that during COVID, for example, they passed a ton of bills where, for example, in New Hampshire, which is where the Free State Project is, where a lot of libertarians have moved, they have forced the Republican Party there to a more libertarian position. And the Republic, like, even though the libertarians were winning elections, they had to appeal to libertarians or lose elections. And so with the COVID policy, the state of New Hampshire was the only state that refused to do any federal tracking of vaccines. They were like, yeah, you want to mandate this shit in schools? That's fine. We're not going to give you any information, right? Like, it became too cost prohibitive to deal with it. The state of New Hampshire has said, we refuse to enforce any gun laws on constitutional carry or assault rifles. So it's like, we're not going to stop you. We're not going to start a war. But if you want people to not have their assault rifles, you're going to have to go door to door with federal agencies, right? Like, so I don't know. That is God, it's such a bigger conversation. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know it is.
It's such a huge thing. I agree that it is a difficult prospect. What I fight for is self-segregation. I fight for people to understand the philosophy a little bit better. And to gatekeep people who presume to be philosophers that say bad things, that are subverted, right? Like, I will gatekeep the hell out of people that are like, I'm the person you should listen to. Now let me say stuff that's totally wrong.
Yeah.
And I think,
do you think,
go ahead. Yeah, I've talked way too much. I'm kind of on a ramble. Go ahead.
There was what was your last point? You had one more point. And I think,
well, I think I think we also should learn from our enemies, right? And I think the Libertarian Party, for example, needs to be a vanguard party. It is a party that pushes forward a philosophy. It's less about winning some minor election and more about pushing ideas into a mainstream space to where conservatives are no longer able to ignore the language of libertarianism, which I think you're starting to see. You're seeing conservatives use words like the state. I don't know if that's Mencius Mollbug and Yarvin more than it is libertarians, but certainly, like, that is, I think, an incredible, I think that's a big part of this fight.
So, mentioning Yarvin, Curtis Yarvin, I've interviewed him a couple times. Great guy, some brilliant.
Lucky writing. You. I'm kidding. You've worked very hard, right?
He should. He's game.
You've had a lot of great interviews.
He had a very controversial essay that everybody hated it, where he talked about how the hobbits need to just follow the dark elves or something. Like, he had this whole thing anyway. So behind you is this bucolic landscape of the Shire, and in the novel The Lord of the Rings, that the Shire is eventually taken over by this white wizard that becomes like the Rainbow Wizard. Literally in the story, he becomes the Rainbow Wizard. He turns from the White Wizard into the Rainbow Wizard. Not at all seeing into the current state of affairs right now, but the Shire's taken over by the bad guy. You think hobbits with handguns, shotguns in the Shire, would have stopped the greater power from this little community? And I'm talking about, like, you saying that there's a community aspect to this, or community solution. Okay, here we go.
Yeah, so listen, I'm just kidding. So the reason I have the Shire behind me, I agree. I think hobbits with handguns would have been a much better situation. It's funny that you noticed that. Not that you notice that it's there, but like, you kind of already are pulling apart why it's there. Which is that, the Shire was very, very close to the type of society that we would advocate for, though pacifism, I think,
bare feet and beer
is weakness. Well, private property rights in an anarchistic society is pretty rare. You know what I mean? Like, maybe the Republic of Kospaya from 1440 to 1822, I believe, is probably the only example of a anarchist society with any longevity with private property rights. So it's very close to what we advocate for, as well as the joke is I'm 6'5". So it's kind of like an inside joke too, because it's just funny to have behind me. And also it's greenery and it's cool to look at. And and then when I was a kid, I used to steal AOL like DVDs from like Blockbuster bins, to like get, like when like the internet, you first had to like get like free trials to get it and stuff. It was like a little period of time there, or to like, use AOL Instant Messenger and stuff. So I would just get those demo keys, and I would put in fake emails all the time, because this was before you had to verify your email address. And so I would put in like the Shire at, Bilbo Baggins at theshire.net, or like Han Solo at the millenniumfalcon.com. And so like, it was a thing. So yeah, so it's a joke. Yeah, no, I think it is in many ways the type of society we would like, but I don't think there is any one right type of society, right? Like people are different. And I think one of the genius ideas behind the founding fathers was the system of federalism, at the time anyways, right? And the idea of having these different experimentations of what could
To
possibly
each
work.
their own rather than do what you will. Like there it was intentionally, like there were communities. It wasn't really a concept of like the individual qua individual. Like there were the different communities, different religious orders, different, settlements. To each
Right.
their own. You could do these community level experiments.
Yeah, and so I mean that's the polycentric view of libertarianism, but also there's nothing wrong with a large swath of land being taken over by one community voluntarily because this is the rules and the mechanisms and the companies that people want in that regard, right? Like I would have no problem with like the entire state of Florida being like one type of anarchistic community, right? Like I think certain models are scalable and certain models aren't scalable, right? Like
Yeah.
I think, for example, I have no problem with communists that live in a commune that don't violate other people's property rights.
Go
But
to your
like,
kibbutz and stop posting on Twitter.
yeah,
Or
yeah,
go and
you know
post,
what I
but
mean?
don't
Like,
try to.
I'll, if you want to go live in a commune, be at it. But I don't think it's a scalable thing without violence and problems beyond like, kind of like a couple hundred people. Like you start getting into like 1,000 people, you start getting what is, I can't think of the psychologist right now. That number, it's like 226 or something. Is like how many, it's like how many people you can like attach a name to a face in a community. And then beyond that, like you don't know who the people, your neighbors are. And so you're not really capable of like having this partnered communal sense of like, we all own each other. Like you're just going to have problems. But yeah, like I have no problem. Like there's no right answer. I mean, there might be, you know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? From an objectivist kind of like pro-life versus anti-life position, there might be one optimal path. But yeah, I don't really particularly care what the community looks like, so long as the community is a voluntary community where individuals are not violating people's private property rights and people are. I mean, it really all comes down to, and this is part of the argumentation ethics situation, is what is conflict? What is a moral system but a system to reduce conflict, right? We want to reduce conflict amongst people to the best of our ability. And where conflict arises is when two individuals or a group of individuals want to use the same scarce resource to opposing means, right? When, in its most simplistic form, Robin and Crusoe are stranded on an island, right? And there is a really good, pliable, thin, long stick, right? And Robin wants to use the stick to fish because we're stuck on an island. I want to make a fishing pole. This will be a good fishing pole. This is how we're going to feed ourselves. And Crusoe wants to get off of the island. So he wants to use it for a raft, right? Conflict has occurred when both of these people are arguing that they have the right to use this stick, right? And that's same true of tax revenue. This is the true of all private property interactions. And it's also true when people violate people's bodily autonomy, forced labor, slavery, etc. It all comes down to this fundamental thing that there are scarce resources. And when multiple people claim that they're justified in utilizing that scarce resource towards their end, conflict has occurred, right? And so what the libertarian solution to this problem is the non-aggression principle, which is to say that someone objectively owns this stick, right?
Okay.
And sorry, I'm getting some lag. Is it lagging on your end as well?
Oh, you're fine. It's just hiccups.
Okay, all right, fair enough. I just wanted to make
What
sure.
if somebody doesn't opt in to the non-aggression? This is the other thing. It's like it's got to be. You have to voluntarily give up your violent nature. Like, what if somebody doesn't opt into the non-aggression principle?
Well, I mean,
and just clubs you over the head.
I think the appropriate answer to that question is to read Jack Donovan's "Violence is Golden." He might be a bit of a psycho now that he's like a gay man, machismo, Nazi type-esque dude. I don't fucking know, but it's an amazing essay, right? We can all say I refuse to trade with you. We can all say, I don't want, in a truly peaceful society, he argues that like the only correct answer to, I'm going to take something is, or we won't be nice to you and we won't trade with you. And, you know, it only takes one upstart to say, or else what? Right. And there has to be an answer to the question, or else what? And this is why I don't agree with the pacifists. I mean, I think pacifists, if they choose to live that way, can live that way. I just don't think it's a scalable solution. And I wouldn't call it morally right. I would actually call it morally wrong, because it's weak. And, you know, from a virtue ethics position, I don't look at cowardice as a form of strength. I look at it as, you know, but yeah, I mean,
so violence in service of this ethic is violence in service of non-aggression in the service of the non-aggression principle is valid.
No, so aggression is the person who initiates force or violence on another.
Okay.
Self-defense is not a form of aggression. Neither is defending someone else, right? Neither of these are a form of aggression. And that's why I brought up the estoppel principle, right? The criminal who aggresses is unable to argue they ought not be aggressed upon until they apologize and pay the damages and retribution for what it is that they've done. So it's like, there's nothing stopping me. When Robin grabs the stick first, says, I'm going to use this stick, and starts turning it into a fishing pole. And then Crusoe comes over and says, no, we need a raft. We need to get off this island. You know, I'm going to take your fishing pole because it's mine, because mine is better, right? It is the state. It is the consequentialists. It is what I like to call conservatives often that are, I like to call them family values consequentialists, right? They'll accept wrongs that are even explicitly wrong in the Bible. Thou shalt not steal, but it's okay because the ends justify the means. I'm like, I don't know where you're getting that, but all right, whatever. You know, like it is those individuals, the aggressor that wants to take the stick, right? Crusoe is completely justified, right, in beating Robin with said stick because it's his stick, right? He has established a historical link to the stick. He has said this stick is mine. He's begun working on transforming the stick into a useful tool so that he can eat, right? He has all of these things. And it is Robin that attempts to make a slave of Crusoe by trying to steal his property, steal his rights. He is the second user, right? And so he's stopped from arguing that he not be punished for doing so and that he not be stopped. The peaceful he is stopped, right? The peaceful namby-pamsy libertarianism stuff. These are baby libertarians that don't understand what they're talking about, and they make conservatives run away from an ideology that really they should deeply appreciate.
So for you, what's your trajectory going forward? You run a Twitch stream. Like, what do you want to cause, or who do you want to whisper into the ear of? Like, what's the message that I could encapsulate in this show and then like seed forth like a bursting pustule of pollen or something like that? Like, what is the core and your hope and kind of like reforming or changing the direction or opening some minds?
I mean, there's so much that I don't really know the right answer. You know, I would say that my goal in life, my goal in doing this, right, is to promulgate the philosophy of libertarianism, to find those few people who really get it so that we can come up with the solutions, you know, to steer this ship that is so off course, off course from the Enlightenment started something amazing in Western history. And we have, and we as a society are refusing to stand on the shoulders of giants. We're refusing to do so. We are climbing off.
We're pissing on the shoulders of giants now. Like we're actively, if you look at all the DEI stuff, like post-liberalism, postmodernism.
Absolutely. That's exactly what we're doing. And they were coming close with the scientific method and with all of these things at discovering something greater. And I think it's, you know, and there's a tradition that we're pissing on even farther back than that, right? We're pissing on Thomas Aquinas, right? You know, and the idea of, you know, that man can know both by, you know, faith, but can also know by reason and logic. You know, we're pissing on Aristotle, right? And Aristotelian logic, with these cockamamie philosophies that make no sense and don't match reality whatsoever, like this Hegelian dialectics and this Marxism, but also the postmodernism that Habermas already defeated, right? It's defeated, and yet it's still here. And we're seeing it run amok in our society and destroying things. And I don't know how to fix that, right? Like I don't have so much hubris as to think that one fat loser, sitting with a green screen behind
And
him
tall.
on I am tall, but like sitting on Rumble right now, is
Yeah.
going to fix everything. But I'm hoping this message resonates with some people and changes some minds, because like ultimately we need to recognize that you don't need to know all this high brain stuff, right? But it really is simple. It really is. You can't steal from people. And when you try and give power to authority on your behalf to force change, it always backfires. Always. It is just a general rule. When I talk to lefties, right? Because I being on Twitch especially, I've debated, but also just had conversations with a lot of communists and socialists and things like that. One of the things I asked them about, and this is getting into the trans thing, right? As I say, imagine for a moment Bernie Sanders is running for president and a giant blue wave comes and you voted for Bernie Sanders to create Medicare for all and ban private insurance. Doesn't that sound awesome? And they were like, yes, I love that. It's like, you got what you wanted. Now imagine for just a moment that 4 years later, over a process of 2 elections, the Republicans sweep and they control all of those institutions. It's like, do you think the Republicans will then get rid of government control over all of healthcare? Or do you think it's more likely that the Republicans might just say, we're banning hormone replacement therapy for everyone, period? My question to you is, why are you transphobic, and why is it that you voted to get rid of trans rights? And every time it breaks them, or they just pivot, right? Because you have to take responsibility for giving the government power, no matter the purpose for the power that you gave it.
Yeah. We don't want a king. I don't know why, but that's a good explanation. Just like Israel. God was right.
Well, like I said before, I'm not a Christian myself, but
you're very well read, I can tell. So
well, I went to Liberty University for grad school as an atheist, which was an experience.
Okay.
When I was taking counseling there, which is hilarious because Liberty University as an atheist was more welcoming to my ideas than going to undergrad at a liberal arts institution in psychology and sociology. Like those places were hellholes. But like Liberty was super willing to have conversations. It was great. But between that and a lot of religious study and growing up Catholic, I learned a fair amount. I have a certain level of respect for Christianity, but nothing will make you an atheist quicker than growing up Catholic.
Yeah, I like Catholicism, but only because I didn't grow up in it. Maybe. I don't know. So how can people follow you, find you? You're twitching all over the internet. So you're on Twitter.
So there's 2 places that have remained. There's 2 places that have remained consistent, right? You can follow me on YouTube, which is where I kind of upload segments and things like that. I occasionally do videos there. Fabian Liberty, pretty easy. Liberty_Fabian on Twitter as well. I'm there, but it looks like we may be switching over to Rumble for our live streaming situation. So if you want to catch us live, usually Mondays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, and other times, you got to follow us at Fabian Liberty on Rumble.
When content creators use the third person pronoun, you never know if they're being hubristic or they have a team behind them. And I don't want to pry into what. Oh,
I have a co-host, but I'm the talker more so. I'm the extroverted theory person, and he's hilarious, and he actually introduced me to anarcho-capitalism. Like he's the one that converted me, and I'm the one that does all the debating and talking. So we're good friends. But he does he does a lot of the editing and producing and moderation, and helps me out tons, and is there for the dark humor as well. So when I use the brand, it's because there actually is 2 of us.
Yeah, yeah. And going forward, do you do planning things, or you're just kind of interacting in argumentation and going forward? Do you have like a project or something for people to look forward to that you're working on this year,
Uh,
maybe
so
summer?
I, oh God, I'm doing so many things. Like as a streamer, it's a different situation because you spend a
Yeah.
lot more time on screen and you spend a lot more time prepping for on stream, and so the amount of time off screen is somewhat limited. But I mean, I'm working on a video to prove via argumentation ethics, but starting with existence exists versus the primacy of consciousness, and then moving into Aristotelian logic, um, all the way through to prove that private property rights are indeed an objective fact, and anyone that says that aggression is allowed is not is it makes talking illogical nonsense. Anyone that says
Okay.
taxes are okay is illogical. I've done a lot of
Okay,
work with the
hold on. So you're making a video that goes from proving that existence exists to
Mhm.
taxation is theft.
Pretty much, yeah.
Wow.
It's a daunting task. I've got a lot of the script written, and then I've got a
I
lot that
like
I need to
it.
edit.
Love it. It's ambitious. I love it.
What I've done primarily that I think is probably distinct about me is using my counseling education and understanding and things like that, along with my understanding of the philosophy of critical theory and queer theory and gender theory, in trying to talk about the specific problem of cluster B personality disorders as it pertains to the transgender and transgender people.
Can we do a second episode, or is that like like another person? Is a whole other personality, internet personality?
No, no,
So
no.
I'd
That's
like to.
that's me. I
Okay.
talk about. I mean, I interviewed Chloe Cole, and I
Okay.
talked with
Yeah.
Richie, and I've talked with Blair White, and a bunch of other people about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean,
Uh,
it's
Okay.
like I said. Remember, there's a triangle. There's philosophy, and then there's culture war, and then there's entertainment. Right?
Yeah.
That's the culture war piece. And
Okay.
that's
What's
yeah.
your
I'd love to talk to you
entertainment?
about
Do you
that.
have little cartoons about diaper changing?
No, no, no. Uh, no. I'd love to talk to you about that. Also, DM me and remind me there's someone who has that I think you would love to talk to that has a great story. And I know you've done a lot of conversations with D-trans people. Jade Rants on Twitter, or you could just reach out to her. Jade Rants on Twitter. I think she told her story with me for the first time, but um, she has a God, in a way that only people that have interviewed a lot of D-trans people know how like each story kind of has a similar path, but also is so tragic and unexpected in different
Yeah.
ways, and there's a lot to glean from it, and it's
Yeah.
a and it's also kind of almost impossible to pick apart because they're each unique, and I don't know. I think you would have a great conversation with her, and I think she would like talking with you because I don't know. Just DM me and remind me, or DM her at Jade Rants on
Yeah.
Twitter.
Okay.
Like reach out to her. She's good, people.
You have a name on the Zoom. Are you allowed to? Am I allowed to say it? To say to end the episode, or do you just want to be Fabian
I mean,
Liberty?
I'm Scott from Fabian Liberty. If
Okay.
you've donated to me on PayPal before, then you know that that's my name. I don't necessarily put it out there, but
Yeah.
it's such a common name that it's
Yeah.
like
Okay.
whatever.
Is
I
it
didn't
Mr.
mean
Scott or
to
just
do it.
Scott?
It's kind of there.
Okay.
I just
There
go
we
by
go.
Scott.
Well,
I
Scott,
didn't
thank you
mean to do it.
very. That's okay. Things happen. It's the internet. You just get locked into things. Email addresses. Scott, thank you very much for joining me. You kind of you hurt my brain in a really good way. Like that
I
Brian
appreciate it.
Adams song. Like hurt so good. So thank you very much for your time. And I'm going to have you back on solo to talk about counseling stuff because I think that's a very important
Real
vector.
quick before we go further, right? I didn't do my internship, right? So I do not have a degree as a master's
Okay.
degree in counseling, right? I have like
Okay.
43, 42 hours and I've looked at it a lot. I just want to be very clear before that I'm not accidentally like putting credentials I don't have.
Okay. Cool.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. I just
All
want
right.
to make this super clear. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
But
Yeah. No legal advice either.
yeah, no legal advice. Yeah, for sure. But I would love to talk with you about that. It's a bit of a
Yeah.
passion project of mine, and I've done some videos about it. But yeah, it's definitely something that no one is talking about. That is a
Cool.
serious element of this, which
Yeah.
is what
No.
I would.
Absolutely.
Just a teaser. A teaser. People need to look up what is a growing understanding of cluster B disorders, which is vulnerable covert personality disorder. It is a sub form of narcissistic personality disorder that a lot of people do not know about. And if you read about that and then you look at trans rights activist tweet, you'll go, holy shit, these are the same thing.
Ooh, it's a mental disorder. You're not allowed to say that, so I'm not going to say that.
You're not allowed to say that. I'm on Rumble. Like, you need to get your for the recording. Like, okay. I'm on Rumble. I can say whatever the hell I want.
Yeah. Well,
I'd love to talk with you again about that. That'd be great. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Let's sign off now. And thank you very much. I'm going to end my end of the recording. Let me know if you're still streaming on your end.
I am.
Okay. Well, I'm going to step over here.
I'll hop out of here. We'll talk on DMs in the future.
Oh, okay. Because you can't quit. Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
All right.
Okay, cool. Signing off.